Are we ready? All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the January 2020 Scholar Share. Today, we're going to have three amazing speakers and an amazing faculty member give us and talk about research. And so the faculty member for today's Scholar Share is Dr. Michael Ryan. He is the GSA Advisor, Director of Academic Support for the Pipeline Projects, Associate Teaching Professor, and Associate Department Heads of the Civil, Architectural, and Environmental Engineering here at Drexel. So please welcome Dr. Ryan.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Oh, sorry, afternoon. Still not sure with the office with no windows. Welcome to today's Scholar Share. Today, as was indicated to you by Guillermo, we have three outstanding presenters. They're going to be, today's Scholar Share is kind of one of those, let's say, hybrid, where it's going to be looking from the perspective of minority population here at Drexel, and the presenters are going to be gearing their presentations towards that aspect. So as is the normal format, we will wait until after all three presenters speak, then we will have more like a panel discussion to do the question and answer session. Okay, so our first presenter is going to be Elijah Davis. I will not go through its entire bio since I am not the speaker here this morning, but in a nutshell, he is a student in the microbiology and immunology department under Dr. Naves Martin. He is currently investigating tool-like receptor-induced responses in microglia, correct? And he is pretty much looking at pathogenic diseases, the mechanisms of it, and I will pretty much leave him to do the rest of his presentation for you. Thank you. Round of applause.
Okay. All right, thank you everybody for coming to my talk. My name is Elijah Davis. I'm a second year PhD student in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. And I'm actually very excited to come and talk to you guys about some of the lessons or takeaways that I've come to have from a conference I attended back in the fall, really about balancing your life. My title of my talk today is Charged Up, Ready to Go, Tackling the Balancing Act of Grad School. So they asked for a pretty informal presentation. I broke it up into three parts. Part one will kind of look at the journey surrounding graduate school. Second, I'll introduce some takeaways I have about self-care. And then finally, some lessons about self-sufficiency. Now, I will say I am not a master in any of these things. Really what I did was I took a 3-day conference and kind of condensed it down into 10 to 15 minutes. What I did do, though, was I added the link to all the sessions, all the handouts, all the resources that I will be discussing so that if anybody would like to go and look back through it, they can. So when discussing the journey, I decided that it might be easiest to talk about my journey. So this is me as a young tot and what my family likes to call my first experiment. This was taken on the maiden voyage of Disney's giant cruise ship, in which they have a slide that goes into a pool. And they hadn't quite tested it or calibrated it out for people. And so here comes little Elijah, just trying to make sure everything is right. It was not calibrated for my weight. I shot all the way across the pool. Everyone was very concerned. But from that time, I was very interested in doing testing and doing scientific research. Fast forward a decade and a half, and I am attending the University of Maryland, Baltimore County as a very ambitious freshman. I'm coming in. I had a plan. I said, this is what I want. I want 4 years undergrad, straight to graduate school, then a postdoc, and then maybe NIH and CDC. That is my plan. So I start working towards it. I put my head into the books, I get good grades, I become very active in my activities, becoming president of the crew team, and joining Alpha Phi Alpha as exec on the board, and then trying to teach minority students to become more interested in science within my local church program. I become so active and I stretch myself so thin that I actually fail to get any research experience. And when it comes time to take the GRE, I completely miss those deadlines. So that entire plan of going straight from undergrad to graduate school did not happen. My advisor told me, you will not make it in, you need to think about something else. So I rerouted. Instead, I took a position at Virginia Commonwealth University and decided to do a solid year of research, making sure I get numerous public speaking events and making sure I'm preparing myself for graduate school. At the very end of that course, we all happened to make it into the graduate school of our study, which brings me to here at Drexel, where I am increasingly gaining more responsibilities in various aspects of my life. As a scholar, I was awarded the Bridge to the Doctorate Fellowship, which comes with its own stipends, stimulations, and conditions that must be met. As an African American, I decided to attend the College of Medicine's Diversity Committee to try to get more resources for underrepresented groups within Drexel. And then within my family, this past August, my sister had her first baby. So I became an uncle and I started spending more time with my family, kind of coming away from Drexel in order to support them and make sure they had the things they need. Now, why did I tell you this story? What are the takeaways? And there's really two things. First is that when we get a goal in our mind, we sometimes imagine a very straight and linear path. We go, okay, this is what we want, these are the steps I'm going to take to get to it, and I'm going to accomplish those steps. In reality, your journey can be indirect with many things that you call what you may see as a backtrack or course alterations or corrections that may actually try to get you down or make you feel like you are failing in your abilities to get to your goal. But that is not the case. These are excellent ways for you to develop other subsets of skills such as communication, group work, public speaking that makes you more valuable to that end goal and beyond. We've all have had those mentors who told us about the experience where they didn't think they were going to end up where they were, but through some roundabout way, they are very happy where they are now. Secondly, we're one person, but we have many hats. We have many different responsibilities that we wear. We are peers, we're on committees, we're teammates, we're male, female, whatever you define yourself as, your nationality, race, creed, and your age, your generation. They come with a lot of stresses and responsibilities. And sometimes we're so busy trying to take care of them that we fail to take care of ourselves, which can quickly lead to you burning out, becoming more irritable, suffering in your productivity, and ultimately having a miserable time. And the thing is, we know that our physical, emotional, and mental health matters. We've been told this many times, especially during orientation, where we had that small section. So if we know that we should be taking care of ourselves, why don't we? And during that session, the presenter actually polled the graduate students and asked, what are some of the reasons that we come up with for not taking care of ourselves? And here they are. We aren't used to putting ourselves first. We're used to putting the science first. We're used to putting the research first. It feels self-indulgent. We're here to be a grad school student, so therefore we must do grad school things. There's way too much to do. We have experiments. After experiments, data analysis. After data analysis, conferences, presentations. So much things that we just feel like we don't have time to take care of ourselves. And then going back to the first feeling of self-indulgency, we seem to get, or we might get a guilty feeling when we do take care of ourselves. And we found that these reasons are deeply rooted within our subconscious, or deeply rooted in our psyche. And that's where the change needs to start. It starts with a change in mindset. Your belief determines your actions. What you think about a situation will determine the choices you make about said situations. If you believe that you don't have time for self-care, you won't find time for self-care. If you believe your studies come first, then you're going to lose self-priorities by always putting your studies first. There will always be a pressing matter. There'll always be an experiment. There'll always be something that you need to do. What you have to find is the time in between to take care of yourself. Taking care of yourself is not a privilege. It's a necessity. It's something we have to do. So our presenter gave us some suggestions about ways that we can fine-tune ourselves to better take care of our bodies, and that our bodies have the answers. There are several ways that we can become in tune with ourselves to try to figure out the best way to take care of our needs. Such things include various counseling services, which we know that Dressel offers, meditation practices, and she recommended Mindshare, which is on the link that I provide at the end of this presentation. But there are also other small meditation practices, 5-10 minutes at the beginning of the day, so that you can just feel whatever is going on inside of you and try to find a way to take care of it. And then there are also relaxation techniques for stresses, such as breathing exercises. Again, on the link that I'll share at the end, you'll find many of these things. And then lastly, graduate school, the dynamics of graduate school are changing vastly, trying to diversify itself more. But it's still a work in progress, and because of that, you might find yourself the only X, insert X, your only race, only member of your gender, only member of your religion within a certain situation. And it can seem like you're navigating within a void, within isolated spaces. And that brings up what's called solo challenges. Challenges that you may feel or face by being the only member of insert race, religion, creed into that. Most of these include enhanced feelings of the imposter syndrome, lack of belonging or lack of feeling isolated, and a lack of mentorship, finding someone that you can truly connect with to go with not just research-related problems, but also life-related problems, things that you can actually form that connection with. So what are the common outcomes of these challenges? And I actually took this directly from the presentation because I felt like it was a great kind of coverall. It can have a negative impact on your productivity. You can actually engage in more self-isolating behavior because you feel like it is protective for you. It can cause emotional exhaustion and anxiety, which has been linked to stress-related illnesses. It can strain your relationship and ultimately lead to thoughts about leaving not just the academy, but whatever position you may have found yourself in. So what are some of the ways that we can achieve success and overcome these challenges? Well, first is to clarify your goals. Ask yourself, who are you? Who am I? What do I want? What do I need from the situation? What do I need from a mentor? Where do I want to be in X amount of time? And how should I get there, or what can I do to make it? Be proactive, create and discuss your plans, develop your outlets for sorrow, angers, and stress, and ask for support. Challenge limiting beliefs. Limiting beliefs are things that we can kind of internalize within ourselves, which we feel may push us towards being better, but actually bring us down. Such as perfectionism. I'm the only X in the environment, so I will make sure everything I put to my PI is perfect. Or hyper-individualism. As the only X in the environment, I'll make sure that I take care of my business, I'll take care of it myself. That's what I need to do. Or playing safe. As the only X, I'll make sure I don't disturb the waters or cause more trouble than I feel like is necessary. These are things that we feel like are actually helpful for us, but in reality, they're actually not. And then finally, taking a communal approach. Look for networking opportunities. We were actually suggested what's called a mastermind group. And what this is a group of 3 or 4 of your peers who meet regularly, and everyone is committed to the success of others. Everyone is dedicated to problem solving and listening to the concerns of the other members of the party in order to help kind of foster a nurturing environment. And finally, as with self-care, your mentality is key. Your inner game, how you believe, what you think of a situation will shape your time, it will shape your productivity, and how you engage with others. And with that, I would like to thank you for taking time to listen to my talk. I mentioned the several sessions that I discussed, and also at the bottom is, in fact, the site to all the handouts and resources, because I talked about self-care, but in reality, there was a lot involved with this conference, especially things such as moving past the PhD, working in science, and so on. I'm free to take any questions at the end of the panel or during the panel session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Micah. Very, very inspiring talk. I am happy he got so much from the conference that we attended. Our second speaker is going to be Rashida Likely. She is a 4th-year student here in biology. She has worn, as Elijah said, many hats here at Drexel. She has actually been working after-school programs in the Philadelphia School District. She has been a member of the Critical Conservation of Urban Education Committee. She has been, of course, working on 2 different NSF-funded projects here. And of course, our research interest is primarily focused on decolonization in science education for minoritized middle school girls through experiential learning activities. So without further ado,
Hello, everyone, and I hope you all are having a great afternoon so far. Would like to get my slides going. All right, so the title of my talk is Lotions and Potions, Science, a Culturally Sustaining Hair Care Science Curriculum. And I want to start with a brief activity. Like, we all know and recognize different brands, different logos and slogans. If I say obey your thirst, what is that? Sprite. If I say what's happening on social media, which program is that? Facebook. If I say ba-da-ba-ba-ba, somebody else, not Jasmine. Who? McDonald's. If I say have a Coke and a smile? Coca-Cola, right? So what if I say, what is a scientist? Who is a scientist? Who can do science? So I went to Google, because that's where you do your searches. And I typed in the word scientist, and I got 18 images. And out of these 18 images, and I logged out, so it wasn't like my cookies were influencing it. And this was January 4th, 2019. I got 18 images. Out of these 18 images, 3 of them include multiple people in one slide. 11 of them are men. No one is particularly obviously black or brown. There is only one type of science that is shown. So when we think of a scientist, we think of a specific brand of science, who can be a scientist, what is considered science content. And children, they can see and they can pick up and they know if science is for them or not. As early as 4th grade, children have an idea of a gender and a race of who a scientist is. And we have some research that you sit children down and you say, draw a scientist. Over 1,000 children have participated in this experiment, and mostly they draw white men in lab coats, isolated, crazy hair, smoke, some colored concoction that nobody knows what it is, and they're by themselves. And what I want to show us or bring attention to is, how did it become this way? How did we get this definition of who a scientist is, what is considered science, and how is it this tiered space, this stratified society that scientists are mysterious and they're loners and they're smarter than everybody and they do things that no one else can do and they say words that only they can say and they work in these spaces that no one else can be a part of. Meanwhile, we also need to assess scientists in a certain way. We have to have multiple choice tests. We have to have state testing, high stakes testing. We have to find some type of way to actually know exactly what you know, and you have to use the exact words we tell you to, or else it's not science, or else it's not recognized. So we end up with these settled hierarchies, and by settled hierarchies, you can see what makes it to the top, what's recognized as science, what's seen as science, and then things that are not. And I want you just to notice the icon, because we're going somewhere. And what's not considered science? So things that you can do at home, things that you can learn from an elder in your family, things that you experiment on your own and do. Are those things labeled as science? Are you taking a multiple choice test about those? Is there curriculum at school that recognizes your science activity and your science person in the classroom? So particularly, there is one group that experiences these types of intersections differently in the science classroom, and that is Black girls. One, because of these intersecting identities, and Elijah did a great job of talking about these different hats that we wear, but specifically Black girls in a science classroom have expressed feeling marginalized, feeling oppressed, feeling othered, feeling erased, feeling left out. Because, again, of these hierarchies. If I tell you that you need to attain this way of talking, this way of being a loner, working by yourself, you do this kind of science, I don't want to do that. How do I persist in that? How do I see myself in that? So we have, again, these intersections of identity, and it's not enough to just attend to one. So if I were to attend to dilemmas of being a Black person in science, how am I now missing ideas and spaces that attend to being a woman in science? And if I only do being a woman in science, how do I attend to spaces of institutional structures that leave me out if I don't have enough money or access to resources or different prep materials? So particularly, again, I want to look specifically at Black girls in science spaces that experiences what's called the double bind in STEM that contributes to their even persistence. And again, this connects really well to Elijah's space, because if I continue to show you that you are not welcome in this space, what you do is not welcome in this space, you don't ever see yourself in this space, you don't want to stay in this space, particularly persisting in STEM. So I came across this quote, and I'll read it to you. It says, "If we are serious about supporting Black girls in science, it is incumbent upon us as science educators, researchers, and teachers to rethink what we really mean by equitable experiences when considering science education reform." So when I got to this quote, I was like, well, I get it, kinda. My background is in biology. I have a master's in biology. I did digestive physiology for a few years, and I worked in a virology lab, and I get it. I did some mentoring, you know, I showed the kids, I worked in the lab, that's enough, right? No, because if what we really mean by equitable experiences, that means as much as we show students how to use beakers, how to wear a lab coat, we also affirm and support and empower who they are outside of the classroom. So if I know that you are able to mix Kool-Aid at your house, you can make a solution in this chemistry classroom. Why can't we uplift both of these things? Just because it's some solution that you might not be used to making, it's still a solution. Why can't we affirm and bring these things into the classroom to teach and introduce STEM activities to students? So I look to go take culture, let's use this one word, culture, and I got this definition from Nasir, Roseberry, Warren, and Lee, and I think that you can use culture to be the medium and vehicle to bring science and STEM activities into spaces with younger children, specifically middle school, where they are starting to lose interest in science and STEM and not want to choose a career because they are starting to see that this space might not be for me. So our culture, everybody's various culture, is a very broad definition that includes the practices communities have historically developed, and it includes the ways of conceptualizing and engaging the world. So practices communities, whatever community, has developed in order to engage the world. And one, particularly for Black women, is hair care. So it says many Black women and girls operate as kitchen beauticians to navigate ways to care for their hair. So home-based hair care is a culture that Black women have used in order to create this space of navigating and engaging the world. And the first two pictures were me in rollers, but this is an example of the various ways that this has become a culture, ways that we have to show ourselves and present ourselves, because there was a point in time where if your hair was too big or too wild or growing out of your head a certain way, it wasn't accepted and welcomed into society. It really it pushed against your way to make money. It pushed against your way to support your family. So what you had to do was assimilate, and you have to fit in. And if the closer I can get to whiteness, or the closer I can get to who's the boss, which may be a white man, the easier it is for me to fit into this space. So this has been a historical clue as to how we, particularly Black women, have engaged in home practices of doing our hair. So how can we now change whatever this structure is that says I need to now be as close to a white man as I can be, which is impossible? How can I do that now and change the space, completely reorder and restructure this? And this is where decolonization. And decolonization is an action. It's a movement, it's a purpose, it's a verb where you have to do it every day and you do it by choice. I have to choose every day to not see Albert Einstein as the ideal scientist. I have to recognize the ways in which that I am at home creating my own thing and saying I am doing a science practice. If I am making an observation, I'm doing a science practice. If I am arguing from evidence, I'm doing a science practice. If I am developing a model, I am doing a science practice. These things are very broad, but we're not labeling students as scientists when they are doing science practices at home. So nobody else had done it, so I figured, may as well. And I want to use what's called culturally sustaining pedagogy to create a curriculum that incorporates hair care as science and identify it throughout the curriculum over a period of 3 weeks, but we'll get there. So culturally sustaining pedagogy is focused on these 5 tenets. First, of course, you want academic success. We don't want to ever lose students being able to be excited about science, content, knowing the words, knowing the methods, knowing the process. Also maintaining cultural competence, critical consciousness that challenges the status quo, sustaining linguistic and cultural pluralism, and addressing assimilist educational policies. Now, these are all a bunch of words, and I'm going to explain how the curriculum addresses these things. So the science content that we'll be looking at is hair and skin. And we'll be using hair care to be the cultural model that we'll be picking up and taking throughout this process. And the way that we are challenging the status quo is we are centering Black women and decentering whiteness. There is only one science book about Black hair. It is called The Science of Black Hair. We have several books about bird feathers. We have several books about polar bear fur. We know how white people's hair works, but what about the coily, kinky, curly hair that comes out of my head that is really also interesting? Where's my science book? It's fine, I'm working on it. We are working through DIY practices, so to stick with cultural pluralism and to continue with using the words that hair culture uses. So we are making our own shampoos, we're making our own soaps. Online, you have a whole community that documents hair journeys. So in the curriculum, we are making comments, like we're on a YouTube channel, and multimodal assessment. And I think that this is really particularly interesting to educators, because how do we know what students know? How do we pick up and see what our students learning and engaging in? So in this curriculum, I am able to do an after-school program titled Lotions and Potions, Science Through Hair Care, with 6 lessons that are 90 minutes long each, 10 middle school Black girls that are in a lab and able to choose to put on a lab coat, choose to put on glasses, and work with a group, and they have an open discussion about what they're doing. A part of the class is I want them to be able to play music. I go and connect the computer to Spotify and say, somebody go DJ. Because I didn't have that in my lab experience, nobody could play music. Or we weren't sharing information across the table because scientists are loners. And we definitely weren't making our own lotions and soaps because we don't make things in the lab that are actually useful or things that I'm used to. And in this, doing all of this moving, we need to assess it somehow to see what the students are doing and what they're learning, what they're able to pick up. So we are making a DIY video at the end, and by we, they are. I'm setting the camera up, the computer up, sending the girls on their way, and they are going to talk through the steps of what it means to make a soap, what it means to make a lotion, and not just, I made my own soap and it works. It's the Black soap in my shampoo is the detergent, and they know these words, and they know that soap is bipolar, and soap gathers around the dirt and breaks it apart and washes it off. And it's not that they're not using the scientific words, they're explaining the process. There's no pressure to take a test, there's no pressure to spell it correctly, there's no pressure in that classroom of you have the wrong answer, let me now shame you, and you are now a poor scientist. So we're removing all of those pressures and spaces in an effort overall to decolonize science. These are 2 pictures of me. One, I am working in a lab testing flu, and the other, I'm at home making my own products. And both of these are science because I'm engaging in science practices both ways. What I want to be able to create is for middle school girls to see themselves being able to do both. And one is not better, one is not more science, one is not, right science. Science is science, and we can do it at home, we can do it in the lab, and we can do it and share with one another. And I wanted to particularly share about the SREB experience and the conversations I had and was able to see with other scholars that it's right on time, and Elijah pointed to it, like there's so much space for us to change things. And I'm really glad I have the opportunity to do that through my dissertation work. And thank you, that'll be the end of my talk. I'm on Twitter at Sheetabita, this is my email, and I'm open for questions at the end. Thank you.
And our third speaker is Jasmine. She is a student in the molecular and cell biology genetics program here at Drexel. She actually is one of those aspiring professors or advisors for underrepresented graduate students in the field of molecular and cancer biology. So without further ado, I will have Jasmine.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan, for the introduction. Thanks, Rashida, for helping me out. So I'm a sixth-year PhD student in the lab of Aishi Noguchi. Our lab focuses on genome instability, and we use many different model systems, but for me personally, I use acetaldehyde-dependent DNA damage on human esophageal cells to try to figure out how alcohol is affecting our esophagus and affecting the development of esophageal cancer. I'm not going to talk to you about that today. I'm going to talk today about something that's also equally as important in my heart, which is just representation and diversity in a productive way in spaces. And so the really great things about both Elijah and Rashida's talks is that, we all have different ways of getting to the same point, which is that, Black people need to be centered and important in all spaces, right? And then I feel like, in general, a lot of people feel like that's not their job, like they feel like it's, maybe it's Black people's job to center ourselves, and there's a lot of isolation and otherness that happens within Black communities that are in predominantly white spaces. And I want to talk about getting to a way which we can promote effective infrastructure and not just commodify Black people to dig out of their own holes and solve their own problems that they did not create for themselves. So my talk is entitled Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity as a Political Statement. And so, as everyone mentioned, we went to the Institute of Teaching on Teaching and Mentoring back in October in Atlanta. It was great. We had a really great time. These are most of the Philly crew minus Elijah. And it was a really surreal experience. I think that in general, the first thing that I noticed, even just in the airport, was I had never been around so many Black people at one time in my life. And I grew up in Southwest Philadelphia for a little bit of part of my childhood, and then I moved to Coatesville, Pennsylvania, which has a large minority population, but Atlanta was still so many more Black people that I've ever seen. And I'm not talking about the way we see, the class disparities in which we see people of color. So I'm not talking about you're seeing white CEOs and then you're seeing Black janitors and brown janitors. I'm talking about you're seeing everybody everywhere, Black people in every space. And it was really empowering just to feel not like a minority, just for a second, just for a quick second, just to feel what it's like to just be in a sea of people that look like you, that you feel like can partially relate to you. So for me, this was the first time that had ever really happened. And I really needed that experience. So that was a really important thing for me. Just to give you just another idea of what it was like. This is the whole SREB group. Mind you, there were about 6 or 7 different groups that were at this conference, we all had around the same amount of people. Here I am, right there in the back. So, it was overwhelmingly packed with not just Black people, but Black people that look like me, that are doing the exact same thing that I'm doing, that are trying to get master's degrees, trying to get PhDs, already have their PhDs, doing a postdoc. They're faculty, they're trying to recruit faculty of color to their institutions. And so it was really overwhelming. But what was also twice as disheartening as it was overwhelming was just the fact that everybody, when we started talking about race relations and we started talking about racism, institutionalized racism on campus, everybody had the same story. So when we think about diversity, I feel like everybody, it's like a buzzword, right? Diversity, yeah, we need diverse groups of people in a space. But we can find diversity if we look for it. But why is everybody still having a bad time? You know, after we push so hard for diversity, why is everyone still struggling? And still not only just struggling like with racism and struggling with racial disparities, but struggling with the same situations that they were struggling with when they were in environments that they felt like needed to be integrated as well. Why do we still have the exact same problems? And I think that that is where not only just like proper inclusion, but that is where equity comes in, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So I think at this conference, I attended maybe 12 or 14 different sessions, and the best session by far was the session that was led by Dr. Kay Whitehead. And Dr. Carsonia Wise Whitehead is a PhD in, I think she has a PhD maybe in sociology or African American studies. And she was really prominent in Baltimore City, where she was able to go into a community that she wasn't really from that community, but she was able to implant herself in that community and share the voices of the people who were experiencing a lot of racial disparities in the area, going from police riots to, you know, just in general police brutality and institutionalized racism in the area. And she provided a platform so that people could share their entire truths without being edited, right? Without being whitewashed. Just, you know, on an editorial in a newspaper. She would interview someone and she would just literally verbatim share what they had to say. And the good thing about that is that I think that in general, Black people never really get to share their whole persona in a predominantly white space. I can imagine, I think maybe 99% of the times I always have to leave a part of myself at home when I come to work. I have to leave a part of myself at home when I sit into a meeting with predominantly white crowd. And I think it's because a lot of times Blackness isn't always comfortable. It's probably almost never comfortable for other people outside of our community. And I think that she really was able to solidify herself in a space where she wasn't even from just by accepting the whole person. And that's something that really inspired me. And I really wanted to see how I was able to then convert that into something that I can bring back not only into the institution here, but also into other spaces that I plan on going to in the future. And so during her talk, which was Becoming a Radical Public Intellectual, she talked a lot about the statistics of Black people in higher positions in America. And so let's just go over a couple stats. I'm a researcher at heart, so I did a little research on this. And there's around 37 million Black people in America. This is not accounting for Hispanic or diasporic Black people. This is just non-Hispanic Black people so that we can keep everything kind of consistent. That's around 12.1%. 4.5 million Black Americans right now have 4-year degrees. However, still twice as likely to be unemployed compared to other graduates, right? Around 1 million have master's degrees. It's split 60-40 women to men. And around 136,000 have PhDs. There's also around 150,000 that have other professional degrees, like law degrees, medicine degrees, and stuff like that in America right now. This is around 0.5% of both Black men and Black women. And when we look at the chart, which you probably can't quite see, but I'm just going to point to it, around 1.3% of white men and around 1.1% of white women have those same degrees. But then also there's about 5% of Asian and Pacific Islanders for men and around 3% of women that have that same degree. So you can see, I mean, we're just a fraction. We're just represented by just a fraction of this population. And it doesn't really equate to the same amount of percentage that we are represented in this country. So we know that only about 5.4% of African Americans in this country have some type of advanced degree, postgraduate degree. And there's 13% of us, or 12% of us here. And so there is some type of disparity that's kind of stopping us from getting to that point. And then even when we get to the point, I mean, we're 33 times more likely to be denied tenure as a PhD faculty member. You know, and I mean, that's really disheartening as somebody who really wants to go into academia. Even on top of that, some statistics that I didn't add on here was NIH released a few years ago that for R01 grants, Black scientists are some of the least likely to reapply for funding, and also some of the least likely to even achieve the funding in the first place. And so not only is there some type of disparaged pipeline that doesn't really allow us to make it to a certain destination, but how discouraging is it to just be constantly turned away? And what are some things we can do to strengthen infrastructure, right? What are some things we can do to make it more welcoming, for people that look like me? Because obviously, it's not, I mean, it's not disparaging in intelligence levels. It's not even about access. Sometimes it's about, in the space, you are not chosen, right? You are not chosen because you're not welcome in a space. And I think that that's a conversation that's painful to have, but I think it's a conversation that we all need to have. And I was really just blessed to be able to have that conversation with Dr. Kate Whitehead at the conference. So this was one of my, really, I think one of my favorite talks that I've ever been to outside of scientific talks, in the last few years. So I really appreciated her. And so I want to talk about the pipeline from diversity to inclusion to equity. So diversity is just people other than white people being in a space, right? And inclusion is what? Inclusion is being welcomed into the space, right? But then none of that will work at all without equity. And the definition of equity, looking through my notes. The definition of equity is the fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people, but at the same time, striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. That last part is so important. I feel like I've sat on so many panels and so many committees where we're trying to recruit students into graduate programs or into undergraduate programs. And I just hear so many people say, oh, well, we brought students in from Lincoln, but they flunked. We brought students in from Cheney, but they flunked. HBCUs, I mean, you have a 3.95 from an HBCU, but it's not a 3.95, right? It's because they don't really respect black spaces like that. And so I feel like in general, it's not just about bringing people into a space, because what happens is we're bringing people into a burning house. That's what happens. So if a student comes to me and they ask me, oh, is this a good program? Do you think this program will offer some support for me? I'm supposed to just say yes, right? So that I can get them into here, and then when they get here, they're alone. They're isolated, they feel othered, right? Just as Elijah and Rashida talked about earlier, you have imposter syndrome, where you just really don't even feel like you belong here. And a lot of the reasons why you don't feel like you belong here are literally attached and displayed on the outside of your body for everybody to see. And that is just kind of like an unfair situation for us to always be tossed in. And so I think it's really important for all of us to always think about what are some ways in which we can tear down racist infrastructure, right? And somehow build up infrastructure that is equitable, truly equitable, in which we can provide resources for people who need it specifically so that we can all be on the same page. Equity is not about giving everybody $5. Maybe one person only needs $5, the other person really needs $30 so that they can be on the same level as you. And I feel like in general, we really need to think with a more open mind so that we can welcome more people into more spaces. Yeah. And so this has really impacted my life in a couple of ways. I mean, it's really strengthened and affirmed, my interest in teaching at institutes that cater to underrepresented populations, such as HBCUs. And right now, I'm at the moment, I'm applying to faculty positions and applying to teaching postdocs. There's a specific postdoc that's really important. It's a NIH-funded, ERACTA-funded postdoc. Allows you to teach at HBCUs while attending a predominantly white institution, which I think is a really great way to bridge that gap. So that's something I'm really interested in. And I think that it's important for us to always kind of think about what are ways in which we can take things that we know need to happen and bring them into the future of our future life goals. So how can I bring infrastructure to bring more scientists in? How can I tie that into activism? How can I tie that into my community service? How can I tie that into my actual research, which Rashida's doing beautifully? How can I tie that into teaching and mentoring both on campus and off campus? And then really importantly, how do I tie that into program development that will eliminate that barrier for people? And then I just want to spend 2 more seconds saying that this is not something that black people are solely responsible for, okay? And so somebody like Rashida, who is breaking her back, making this great program where she's teaching students how to decolonize science, right? So that she can bring more black girls into science. This is not something that only Rashida should be doing, because Rashida shouldn't be the only one that cares about black people in science, right? We all should care about black people in science. And as many times as I've sat on committees where they offered me to do a whole bunch of work with no pay while they sit, and make $250,000 paychecks, right? I mean, I'd rather them, volunteer to help somebody like Rashida the same amount of times that they ask me for my labor for free, right? And so I think it's really important for us to, instead of, stealing minority labor to fix minority problems, why don't we sometimes, why don't you all, as white folk and as, as folks that are in any majority group, if you're cis, you can do this with trans folks, right? If you are identified with a gender, you can do this with gender non-conforming folks, right? If you're skinny, you can do this with somebody who is fat or who is large to combat fat-phobic tendencies in society. Why don't you think of a way in which you can use your privilege and your proximity to privilege in these different institutionalized spaces? Think of a way to also bring stuff to the table. And I think that that's something that will get the job done a little bit more quicker. And I think that's something that's necessary for the success of Black people in science and Black people in probably any field. And so I just want to end with my favorite Assata Shakur quote, because I feel like this was a hortative thing. This was something that really is supposed to be a call to action for everybody, so that we can kind of see how we can really drive people that really need to be in spaces, and how we can, welcome people into spaces. It's our duty to fight for our freedom, and it's our duty to win. We have to love each other, and we have to support each other, right? We have nothing to lose but our chains, right? So I feel like we can only go up, and it's really important for us to, to make sure we're thinking of other people and not just thinking of ourselves. That's it. Thanks.
Thank Jasmine, Rashida, and Elisha for inspiring and provocative presentations. I would like to invite all three to come up, and we will open up for questions from the audience.
How did you guys get selected to the SRE so everyone else can benefit from?
Oh, so that might be a question directed to me. So, if you noticed, all three of our panelists or presenters were actually making reference to an SRE conference they all attended to. They were selected by their respective department. Their department heads would have submitted their names to the grad college and the provost office. And as long as they met the criteria of being a minority that is the group that the SREB program, Southern Region Board of Education, actually supports or sponsors, they got selected and sent to the SREB, which then went through screening interview processes before they actually get accepted to go and register for the conference. So it's not just, oh, you are attending, you pay a fee going. No, it would be the school or university have to nominate you, and you then go through a screening process with the SREB. So that's basically how. The program itself, what was it? It is pretty much representing minority groups, whether it be African Americans, Indian Americans, or Asian Americans, whatever it is that is considered a minority group that would have been supported to be transitioning to academia. So it's one of those programs that's looking to try and increase minorities in academia, and they basically put on a conference every year that I've never seen a conference like this, that the entire intent is increase professional development for minority students, open access to get into universities, so you actually have recruiters from universities all over the country being there, trying to get applicants in to be professors or students, depending on whichever way it says. So they were one of the fortunate few that got accepted into the program, and I'm happy that they actually got so much from the program itself. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
For Elijah. So, great talk. All actually really awesome talks. What more can we do as a university to sort of remind or require graduate students to think about their sort of self-care, mental health, and wellness? Do you think that there's more that we can be doing? And maybe some suggestions, and all three of you maybe.
Well, there are, I wouldn't say seminars, but I'm sure that there are flyers and postings because I'm from the New College Building. So there are always pamphlets, flyers, and things that are posted just along the elevators and along the walls that even if they're not accustomed to me or even if they're not attributed to me, I glance and I read through them just because. So that's one way of just a simple flyer reminding you of various self-care is important or various techniques that you can go to or various link in site. Those won't go unnoticed, especially with an entire building that 18 floors and 2 PhD medical master students. People are going to look through those things and say, okay, you know what? I can do some of these. Okay, breathing exercises. Oh, there's a link. Let me snap that and take a picture real quick and go home and do some of that. So just first by eye. I wouldn't necessarily attach myself to requiring a program, but I'm sure so there are yoga. There's a session where students have just run yoga practices, and I'm sure they've come through and gotten them approved by the graduate school. So I guess making yourself more available and saying that, hey, we're up in our offices, but we do care about your health. Please come to us and then be open when they say, I have this idea, I want to run this program, and say, okay, I think this is a good program, I'll allow you to run it. And then you can slowly start getting people to say, okay, I would like to also run this program. And then so you can cross our community that cares. I think there's just a lot of science and research being done that kind of bogs us down. And so I guess, we need that constant reminder that, hey, it's not just about graduate school, it's about you. And so posters, flyers, and making yourself more available to people can do such a thing. Everyone else would like to.
I'm in favor of mandatory programs only because there's already so many mandatory programs. So over at where we're at in the college building, first years are required to attend all these LEAP sessions. It's like once a week for the whole first semester or something. I'm sure that one of the LEAP sessions could be dedicated to self-care. And then also, a lot of times bringing people together is always, the office is always asking people to come there instead of the office going. And when you think about it, which one is more feasible? You have 2 or 3 people in this office, you have hundreds of students you need to reach. Instead of trying to get hundreds of students to come to you, why don't you just come over? Why don't you just come over and just set up a table and hand out some food on the first floor of New College Building? I swear to God, everybody will come. Everybody will come. I'm a flyer ignorer and I'm an email deleter. I will tell you right now, I just am, me personally, because I just have 10,000 emails that I have to do. So I think that there's different strokes for different folks, and I feel like some people are able to sort of pull that information out and then do things on their own, but some people just really need it to be in their face, and I feel like what better time or what better place? The Student Counseling Center is literally right across the street from New College Building. It wouldn't take nobody but 5 minutes to put everything in a briefcase, walk over and sit at a table and hand out some cupcakes, and I bet you that you would get more interest.
Something both of them said was being available, and I think being seen. So a lot in the School of Ed, we had a time where we went to one of the faculty members' houses and all the grad students sat around and learned of the past and the stories of our faculty members, heard about some of the struggles that they came up against with partners or new children or new homes. And so just knowing that these people are there, they also had a similar experience, you're not by yourself. So like Jasmine said, going and being present and being seen and represented, and not in a space of authority, but in the space of a person. Like I'm sharing in this experience with you, you're not alone. Even if it is someone that you don't have a lot of shared identities with, it's still, I'm here, and I'm present, and I'm open to listening.
My dear.
Sorry, I just got up. But I just wanted to get your input on, do you guys have any ideas on how Drexel or the graduate college, based off your experience at this conference, could possibly cater more to minority students or within the community within underrepresented minorities in graduate school in general?
Yeah, I have a lot of ideas. I tell people all my ideas all the time, they just don't do them. I mean, first you need to hire more black and brown staff. I mean, people just don't want to hire black and brown staff. So over at College of, not College of Medicine, I mean, over at New College Building, there is one black faculty member, one. And so he's stretched thin. I mean, he runs a diversity program. He's the token in all the meetings. Everybody has a question about black people, they all stare at him. Like, I mean, there needs to be more of us here, right? And it's not like we're not available for hire. That's the first step. You gotta hire more people. And also we need to stop disparaging HBCU degrees and start respecting them. And that requires really ultimate breakdown of institutionalized, like, colonization of the mind of racism. I mean, people just don't respect, you know, certain things that they don't understand, or maybe just because they don't want to respect them because they've chosen not to. So I feel like respecting people that have HBCU degrees and understanding the history of why HBCUs even exist and why you know what I mean? Like, I mean, that is just, it's wrong to turn around and frown upon that. Like, look at what we even had to go through to even get here, right? So hiring black faculty and respecting, you know, black people's education. Those are two things.
And I'm all about decolonization and transformation being action words. And so I don't think that oppression, erasure, marginalization happen quietly, happen kindly. It's about time things are loud and disruptive on purpose. So if you want to see a change, you have to make a change, and that means gathering behind an effort that maybe you weren't close to before. But because I know Elijah cares about it, I care about Elijah, I'm going to be here. It might be for, I don't know, let's introduce suede shoes into the lab as appropriate PPE. Like, this is what Elijah needs, this is what he needs to feel seen and a person. I'm going to do what it takes. And knowing that I have support on my peer level and support at the grad college level, and not fearing that I might get put out of my program, I might be isolated, I might be shamed. So this space of support and safety, I think can be definitely worked on. That's part of inclusion. That's part of being welcomed and a part of the larger Drexel family, to just be seen and supported.
And definitely, along with hiring more black and brown staff, I'm always for hiring more black and brown students, respecting students who come with HBCU degrees. Because I see there should be no reason why I'm the only African American on my board in the entire floor of the lab. There's no reason that am I the only one? No, of course not. I'm not, I think I'm special, but I'm not that special. There are more people with the qualifications, with my skin color, that can be hired. And so what I'm trying to do is, on this diversity committee that I'm part of, is trying to figure out what exactly the hiring process is. And then, of course, when I get selected, or when you get selected to interview students, first be honest with them, and then try to figure out what do you want as a student coming in? What can be done that we can help you? Or what would you like for me to take back up to the staff as a new coming student so that you can get the help and resources that you need? I feel like we need to focus on faculty, focus on current students, and focus on incoming students, and actually show the respect that they most rightfully deserve.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay, I want to thank our panelists for being here. Thank you, our panelists. And thank you very, very, very much for taking time out.
Split myself.
Great.
Split myself.